Hi guys, I wanted to do an introduction to chemistry as our first flipped classroom lesson. Before we get started, I want you to keep in mind two questions. How how will we as chemists solve problems, and why is it important to study chemistry? So, before we get started, I'd like you to take a look at these two questions. So, why is it important to study so many different subjects in school, even if you think that when you're older, you might not need them? And then why is it useful to learn problem solving skills? So I want you to take a minute and answer these two questions into your notes. Why don't you press pause now, and when you're finished, play again. So what is chemistry? Chemistry is technically defined as the study of the composition of matter and the changes that matter can undergo. Notice that the word matter keeps popping up in this definition. So before we go any further, why don't we define what matter is? So matter is technically defined as anything that has mass and occupies space. Now remember, space is going to be something that we consider having volume to. So what I like to say is that matter is anything that we can consider stuff. Areas of study that we are going to look at throughout the year. So the 5 areas are organic, inorganic, analytical, biochemistry, and physical chemistry. Now, organic chemistry is defined as the study of all chemicals containing carbon. We call it the life chemistry because all living objects have that carbon atom inside them. Now, it's not just life, so it's not like all living things are the only thing under the organic chemistry field. It can have a lot of plastics and synthetic fibers, involved in it as well. So an organic chemist might develop new lightweight plastics for a frisbee or something. Inorganic chemistry is actually anything that does not contain carbon. So there are a lot of elements out there. And all those other elements, the way that they bond with other elements and make their compounds, those are going to fall under the inorganic chemistry. Now, an inorganic chemist might develop some materials that provide a strong structural part for a building. There's a lot of other aspects of this as well, but this is just one example. Analytical chemists, their area of study is to focus on the composition of matter, so how matter is made up. Composition is what it's made up of. So analytical chemists might actually test the air to see how much pollutant is in the air. Biochemists, on the other hand, study the process that takes place inside a living organism. So you've actually talked about biochemistry in your living environment class last year. Think of lipids and carbohydrates, proteins, amino acids. Those all fall under the branch of biochemistry. And then physical chemistry, this is an area of study that deals with the mechanism, the rate, and the energy transfer that occurs when matter undergoes a change. So physical chemists might actually study factors that can affect photosynthesis in trees, for instance. Okay, so you might be thinking to yourself right now, why am I studying chemistry? Why am I taking this class? It doesn't sound like it's all that exciting. I promise you it is, but there are 3 real reasons that, all students should actually have some sort of basic knowledge of chemistry. So the first one is that you all have this innate desire to ask questions about how things work. Chemistry can actually help you understand that reasoning. The next one is maybe your career you feel doesn't need chemistry, but I can assure you that there are many careers out there that don't seem like they're chemistry related at all, but then actually require some sort of chemistry background. Lastly, when you turn 18, you're going to be eligible to vote. There's actually a lot of science issues out there today that when it comes to voting day, they ask voters to make an informed decision and come up with what they expect to be the better outcome. So now we're going to get into the problem solving in chemistry. There's 2 ways that we're going to problem solve. The first way is through experimentation, and the second is through calculation. Now, please understand that the most effective problem solving always involves developing a plan and then implementing that plan. So the scientific method is something that you hopefully have heard of before, and I'm not the first one to talk about, but there are three main topics in the scientific method. So the first one is making observations, then we're going to propose and test hypotheses, and then finally we're going to develop a theory from those hypotheses. Now, when you make an observation, you can actually form a question from that. That question is going to be our hypothesis. Then, from that hypothesis, we're going to come up with some sort of an experiment to run. We'll run the experiment, we'll find its outcome. Now, if the outcome is negative to the hypothesis, then we have to go back to our hypothesis, change it, remake a new plan of action for our experiment, run the experiment, and find a new answer. So we continuously do this until our hypothesis and our experiment match correctly. Then we could go into the final stage of developing a theory. Once a hypothesis meets the tests of an experiment, it then can become a theory, and then we can take that theory and make it into a broad set of observations. So everyone around the world will come up with the same answer. Now, I want to go back just to the proposing and testing hypotheses because I skipped over variables and I'd like to go through them. There are two types of variables. The first type of variable is the independent variable. This is the one that you can control in the lab. That's the one that you can change. The next variable is something that cannot be controlled by you. So it's something that may or may not change during the lab, but it's not because you have done anything to it. So you have no effect on it. So the next part about this is solving numeric problems. There are three broad areas of this as well. The first one is to analyze, which is to identify what is known and unknown in a problem, which will help you to make a plan of action. So really this analyzation part is very important. Then you're going to calculate it. Hopefully, if you have an effective plan, the calculation is going to be the easiest part. And then finally, you're going to evaluate. Once you find your answer, go back to the numeric problem. Make sure that your answer matches that numerical problem. If it doesn't, then you really need to go back to your first step and analyze it all over again, and then start again. Just the same kind of idea as the hypothesis. If our hypothesis does not match the outcome of the experiment, then we have to go back and revise the hypothesis. Okay, so this is actually the end of our lesson. So again, I want to go over those two questions that I had on the first slide. Why is it important to study chemistry? I want you to take a minute and reflect. I want you to kind of come up with an answer for this yourself. When you're finished, I'd also like you to answer, how will you solve problems in the class? What is the best plan of action? Okay, have a good night. See you tomorrow.